President and CEO of Galiot Insurance Services. We are a specialty insurance service firm that focuses solely on the life science industry. I started this practice 6 months ago after attending industry events for the last 5 years and recognizing the true need of life science executives to have specialized insurance services. Similar to the medical field, where if you develop cancer, you go see an oncologist rather than a general practitioner, same holds true for insurance services. Life science companies face unique exposures that require specialized insurance services. Today I'm going to talk to you about Insurance 101 for life science companies. So let's get started. So most companies, particularly when they first form, they have their priority list, which you see up here on the screen. They know that, they've been working on some research at an academic institution or medical institution. They need to protect their IP. Next, they start thinking about forming their entity. They know that they have to have an accountant to help them work through the various tax regulations. And also a big ticket item on their mind is funding to get this off the ground. So they're looking at various grant applications, talking to friends and family, and looking at angel investments. But as this young company matures, they will start to get the need for insurance. And that's oftentimes when panic sets in because they don't know where to turn to. So I'm going to highlight today 6 key areas in the life cycle of a life science company for when the need for insurance will come up. Here on the screen, you'll see the 6 key areas that I'm going to cover. So oftentimes the first need comes up when it's required by contract. So you have a life science company that has developed through their research at an institution or medical institution or academic institution, and now they've set up their entity and they're looking for commercial space. It might be within an incubator, it might be a real estate lease. They also might be looking to license their technology out of that institution. And what's going to happen is they're going to be given a contract, and it's going to have very specific insurance requirements that they need to execute the lease agreement or the contract. Also, another key area that'll come up in the life science industry is they'll be conducting clinical trials. If they're conducting clinical trials here in the United States, they're going to be engaging a contract research organization, which is known as a CRO, to help them conduct the trial. And they also will be subject to an institutional review board, or IRB, so that they can conduct their trial. And both of these entities, the CRO and the IRB, are going to have specific contracts with insurance requirements that need to be met to either engage with the CRO service provider or to start your clinical trial that the IRB is overseeing. Also, life science companies will enter into vendor and supplier agreements. We'll talk about this a little more later when we talk more about supply chain, but a lot of times in these vendor or supplier agreements, there are also going to be specific requests for insurance that is needed inside the contract. An area that most of us would be familiar with is if you're purchasing capital equipment or you have a vehicle lease or some kind of finance agreement, there's also going to be the need for insurance inside that contract. Next area that often comes up in the life cycle of a life science company is when insurance is required by law. So let's say you're going to start hiring some employees. You're going to need workers' compensation insurance. Let's say that you're going to have a corporately owned auto. We all know that every state has statutory requirements to carry auto liability insurance. Also, if you're in a state such as California or New York, you may be subject to statutory disability requirements where you have to purchase a policy for injury to your employees off the job. And then another area, a lot of life science companies, particularly in the early phases of development, will conduct their trials overseas. Unlike US FDA, that has no specific insurance requirement, other countries have very specific insurance requirements to conduct trials inside their country. As we all know in drug development, that time is money. Failure to procure the proper insurance requirements to meet the specific needs of the trial, where you're going to be conducting in that country could cause delays. And again, as I said, time is money, and we could be talking about millions of dollars in drug development. So it's important to get that right. Another key area we talked about a little bit earlier, but a lot of times life science companies are always raising money to continue to move their product towards commercialization, or those that are commercialized maybe to expand their operation. So you could be looking at a grant agreement that'll have specific insurance requirements. Certainly if you're getting any venture capital or private equity money, a lot of times these guys, and even institutional funding, these guys are going to take a seat on your board, and they're going to require you to carry directors and officers liability. So that creates a need for insurance. Another area that a lot of life science companies will look at to inject cash into their company is transitioning from private to publicly traded. And oftentimes these companies end up with sticker shock because a private directors and officers liability policy may be high single digits or double digit premium, and publicly traded D&O insurance for less coverage starts at around $100,000 and up. And more recently, there's a Supreme Court decision known as the Sion decision, where companies that have gone public inside of 3 years could be more susceptible to securities lawsuits if their stock price drops below their initial public offering. This is a very risky area that requires specialized services to navigate. Next, we're going to look at, inside the organization, the transfer of catastrophic risk. So companies that are preclinical, their largest asset outside of their intellectual property is going to be their research and development property. So let's look at that genetically modified mouse from Charles River that you paid $185 for. You've now been working on this mouse for a couple years, and it could be worth upwards of $250,000 all of a sudden. What happens if that mouse is damaged or destroyed? There's insurance protection that will help the cost to recreate your research if it's damaged or destroyed. In addition, that loss may also impact milestone funding, which you can purchase coverage for, and also perhaps FDA recertification during the process. Another catastrophic risk inside a life science company is you may be conducting research for others. This creates a professional services liability on your part, so you need to look at errors and omissions or professional liability coverage. We all know that there's a big buzz around cyber liability or data breach protection. Data breaches are happening every day, and healthcare is a prime target for data breaches. So a lot of life science companies in the industry have protected health information, which is subject to HIPAA and HITECH. Cyber liability insurance is not a one-size-fits-all product. It's a very specialized area that requires the help of a specialized insurance services provider to help navigate the waters. And we've touched on this a little bit already, but human clinical trials. Human clinical trials is product liability for pre-commercialized product. And when you're talking about clinical trials, yes, these are often conducted in a highly controlled environment. However, you're talking about treatments of humans that are oftentimes untested. And it's not that you hear about a whole lot of frequency when it comes to clinical trials claims, but when you hear about it, it's often severity. And so getting a human clinical trials insurance protection right is of utmost importance for a life science company. Another area we'll look at is operationally specific risks. So once a company has now made it through FDA and they're on the market, you now have the need for product liability. You now have your product in the stream of commercialization, and so you need protection for adverse reactions in the marketplace. Often a dirty word in the life science industry that cannot be overlooked is having a strong product recall plan, but also you can purchase insurance to protect against the costs of product recall, particularly if, say, the FDA forces this upon you. Major area that's operationally specific is supply chain disruption. We're talking about two key areas here. One, we're talking about property, and then we're also going to talk a little bit about liability. From a property side, particularly in, say, drug development, you might have very specialized formulation or API that only one specific vendor can perform for you, oftentimes in the world. What happens if there is a major property loss to that vendor that disrupts their ability to fill your orders? This is going to have a huge impact on your operation and the ability to earn income. There's insurance protection for this exact scenario. Also, when we look at this on the liability side, it's very important to analyze all your contracts within your supply chain to make sure that you are insulated to only claims that are within your control. You don't want to be subject to liability due to some manufacturing defect in the supply chain. So it's very important to make sure you analyze your contracts and that you have strong protections in place. Another major area within life sciences is intellectual property infringement. Arguably, intellectual property is the largest asset of a life science company. Insurance is purchased to protect assets. So this is a very specialized area of insurance, could be a whole nother webinar, but there is insurance protection that exists out there for both defense if a company claims you're infringing, or abatement if you need to go on the offensive. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about M&A as an exit strategy. For most small life science companies, this is the end game. We all know that large pharma, large device is spending less money on R&D, and they're outsourcing this. And how they're doing this is that they're looking to smaller companies to be the innovators and bring the next best thing to the market. And so that's where M&A comes into play. And so most importantly, we want to be looking at extended reporting period, often referred to as tail coverage. And there's three major areas that we want to make sure that we're looking at, and that's product liability, errors and omissions, and directors and officers liability. It's very important that that you purchase this coverage early enough in your development so that you have continuous coverage. And then it's also important to see that you've pre-negotiated a runoff period after the purchase. And the reason why this is important is when you're being acquired, the purchaser does not want to worry about some claim that comes up 3 years after the acquisition or something that happened 2 years prior to the acquisition. That should be on you as the seller of the product and not them. And so having this coverage in place is very important. And then another specialized area that we see transactionally is representations and warranty. Again, this could be a whole nother webinar on just this topic, but representations and warranties made by the seller inside a contract oftentimes then creates the need for the seller to have an escrow account where a portion of the proceeds of the sale are placed in there, which is often undesirable to the seller, the life science company that we're talking about. And so this special area of insurance is protection for the buyer in case a breach of representations and warranties come up down the line. So with that, I look forward to fielding questions from you and talking with you later. Thank you for your time.